Hi, everybody. Greg Heilman with the Sound on Stage here with another episode of Behind the Curtain. Today, I am joined by Parmida Ziaei, Iranian multidisciplinary artist here based in Seattle. You are a set designer, performer, choreographer, costumer, curator, person of many talents. And we're going to talk about the Seda, the theater group that Parmida helped co-found. We're going to talk about their current show, English, which is on stage at ArtsWest. And then we're going to talk about some of the other set work and some of the other work she's done around Seattle this season and past seasons, and hopefully what's coming up next. So first of all, Parmida, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
First of all, I had a chance to see English this past weekend. I loved it. My review's out on the website. It's sold out, which is great.
Yes,
It runs through the 28th. By the time we post this video, I think it'll probably be after close, but it's sold out, so that's good news.
Yes, it is.
But first, if you don't mind, let's go back and talk about Seda, how that started, and then we'll talk about a little bit about your philosophy in there and some other things related to that.
Yeah, of course. So 2019, I had already sort of started doing some theater in town, and I was like, this was at the last Gregory before pandemic started, and I was like, oh, I'm kind of the only Iranian Middle Eastern person that I know of around here, and I was just like curious to see who else is out there and just kind of reach out to community. And so I just kind of made this Facebook post. It was like, okay, is there any other scenic designers? Probably not, but like, is there any other Iranians in this town who do theater? And parallel to that, Naghmeh Samini, who's the co-founder of Seda Theater, and a very prominent, well-known playwright in Iran, academic, and just all-around incredible person. She was visiting Seattle, and like she had lectures here, so I was like, of course I knew of her, but she also was searching for something here. And I didn't know that, but a mutual friend was like, I think you two should meet. Maybe there's something there. And I just was like, oh, exciting. I just get to meet and chat with Naghmeh. Like, that's the best part. And I didn't even think of anything really at the time, let alone a theater company. But Naghmeh always has this really, she says this really well always, that like one day I went to her place on a fall evening in Seattle, cloudy Seattle, and like, we were just like, oh, let's just chat. And 3 hours later, we decided we want to have a theater company. We want to do a theater class. We want to like name it Seda. We had a whole thing already planned. And it just it felt so meant to be, and that we were really like wanting to do this. So we started with a theater class for Iranians in town who were just excited to learn about theater or had done theater. And we had a huge group of people who showed up to our workshop. And we realized that people really are excited for doing Iranian theater here, and like in our community at least. And at the time, we didn't really know the extent of like how much we could do outreach. But Seda really, like in terms of our goal and mission, was Seda means voice in Farsi. Also means sound, actually. So we, our goal was to give voice. We were like, we just want to have our voice on a stage in the way that we wanted to show. And also, there's so many immigrant refugee stories in Iran and beyond that, there's just so much beautiful plays from that region that are not really known here. So we wanted to bring that on stage too. So started with classes with Iranians and kind of kept going through COVID with Zoom things and, classes and shows and everything that we tried to all adapt to.
We all did during COVID,
Exactly. And out of pandemic, then we just started doing more in-person things.
So it's interesting that, there's Seda, there's Pradadwani, there's Theater 33. There's a bunch of these little theater groups that are focused on a specific geography, which is a nice thing to see. And I imagine that being able to work as a group not only helps that group, but also helps getting actors and creatives from these groups out into some of the other theater.
Exactly.
I mean, you're an example of that, right?
Absolutely. I think this is another goal that I always at least have, is that, some people open doors for me to get into theater, and I feel like I got very lucky that happened. And I think we should do that for other people, especially in our community, who don't necessarily, actors are always the people we always talk about because roles are very specific to, ethnicity and region and age and all of that, and language and accent and all of that things. So like if we could have provided an opportunity for more Iranian actors or Middle Eastern actors to be on stage, but also people behind the scenes, and like really bringing people together to work on stories that they relate to and feel good about doing on stage and have opportunity to even do them in the first place is like, I think one of the things that has been very exciting this past year. And then we introduce them to other theater companies, you know, like people come and see our shows and say, oh, that person is actually a really good actor that I didn't know about. How about like they auditioned for our show at so-and-so, you know?
Yeah.
So it all works hand in hand, I think is the exciting part.
So in Iran currently, with the way things are going socially and politically, what are the opportunities there at this point for folks to participate in theater?
Yeah. So theater, you know, is actually quite thriving there. And you know, not considering all the challenges of like this past year and a half, but in general, like despite all the censorships and limitations and all the things that, all the hoops that you have to go through that here nobody necessarily thinks about or considers, people do incredible, bold work. And Nagma used to say that, you know, right before pandemic of course changed things as well. Like there's just a lot of things in the recent years. But a couple of years ago, she would say like at any point in time, every night you could go to 100 shows in Tehran. Wow. Tehran only. And this is, we're talking like small shows, super limited resources, to like big shows on big stages, again, considering all the censorship and everything. But it's just incredible to me that like when you put limits on people, actually they kind of push against the limits and then do some really bold, incredible work. Lots of amazing theater artists. They do a lot of adaptations, new works, avant-garde stuff. I mean, you name it. There's incredible stuff happening there too.
Great. Yeah. Well, let's talk about English, which is the latest show that you've participated in. I think, you know, and we're going to get into some of the other work that you've done around Seattle this season as well, but this is something I think that you've been a little more involved in, given that it's a co-production with Seda and ArtsWest. Can you talk a little bit about that relationship and how the show came about?
Yeah, so this is our second show, in-person production we've produced and co-produced. And so we realized that, you know, of course, coming out of the pandemic, we wanted to produce shows, but as many people know, producing shows as a small theater company is very difficult. And so when we did The Forgotten History of Mastane, which was our first show, we realized, oh, there's actually a lot of interest. We sold out that show. We did it again as a co-production with SPT. And at that time, we were like, yeah, this co-production model is great because we get to bring a lot of audiences together, share resources. Just, you know, it's a great collaborative environment, and it helps both companies, you know, the company that's hosting and us, because we share our resources and our knowledge and our plays and our, you know, casting and everything, but also they get to experience and have audiences, you know, experience something different. So I had been working with ArtsWest as a scenic designer before, and I knew Matt, artistic director there. So he reached out when he learned about Seda and what we were kind of doing. And he's like, yeah, there's this new play called English kind of making rounds in the U.S. And this is before it had gotten the Pulitzer Prize. And I also had heard about it because I had some friends who were involved in the New York production. And so he was like, yeah, have you read it? And I was like, no, but send it to me and we'll see. And we started reading it and kind of talking about it. And he's like, yeah, if we do this, we need you guys because we don't have the, you know, connections or access to casting and everything. And we were like, yeah, let's talk about it. So that season, this is like almost a year and a half ago when it first came out. And kind of didn't work out for that season, this previous season. And then that passed, we did our first production. Matt was like, let's talk again. You know, this is still on my mind and I want to produce it. So we did the reading in Seattle and we're like, let's see who's out there and if we can even find a cast for it locally. So we did a reading. We got so excited. Some of the people who were in that reading are in the cast now. And right when we decided to do it for this season and, you know, got the rights, it won the Pulitzer as well. So we're like, perfect timing. So it just kind of started with me having some connections with ArtsWest previously, they seeing our work on stage and just kind of seeing that like this can be a really good thing to move forward with, knowing that we can also cast it mostly locally. Some of our casts are from LA, but we just found the right people in the right community produce it. So
Yeah, and it's really a wonderful story about language and personality and culture, and I love the idea of and I mentioned this in my review of when one of the actors speaks broken English, they're speaking English. When they're speaking, non-broken English, they're speaking Farsi.
yes.
And it's to watch them go back and forth so quickly.
Yeah.
It's
a challenge.
Yeah,
For
yeah.
them.
Because I mentioned that I'd taken Spanish in high school, and you get to the point where you're trying to come up with something, and then you drop back to English, but then there's also that realization that when you start thinking in that language, you start becoming a little more fluent, and
Exactly.
So it's a great story. I wish everybody could get to see it. Unfortunately, it's sold out, and it's. Fortunately, it's sold out.
Fortunately, I know. For us, fortunately.
Yes.
And yeah, it's a very powerful. I think people are really responding to it. We have a huge number of people who are not Iranian who are coming to see this show, like yourself, and many other people who are from various backgrounds, immigrants themselves. English as a second language, but from like different communities, and it's just so exciting. I always try to be in the lobby and just talk to people and hear like how much they're connecting with something that is so simple on the surface. Like it's a very interesting subject matter because you haven't really seen it in theater that a play talks about language in this way. And also, obviously, in an Iranian setting and set in Iran, which is also a different lens because usually when we talk about English as a second language, we look at it as an immigrant story in a different country.
Yeah,
but this
in
is
America,
in Iran.
yeah.
Exactly. So it's just exciting to hear how people are really responding to plays and something that's very much shared with all of us in different ways.
Yeah, well, let's talk about your the hat you wore as a scenic designer in English. And also some of the other credits that you have this season. It seems like everything that's a wonderful show. Stew at ACT, Fantasticks at Village Theatre, Case for the Existence of God also at ACT, and The Bed Trick at Seattle Shakespeare. Wonderful show, by the way. I mean, they're all good. They're all good. But these are, and this plus English, 5 different sets, I guess 4 different theaters, but all different.
Yes.
So what is your philosophy on building a design? How closely do you work with a director and a vision, and how does that all come together?
Yeah, so usually when I'm reached out to about a show, the first thing is, of course, the script. That is what we are about. We're telling a story. So I always read that without any kind of thought from myself. Like I just I'm like, okay, what is this story trying to be? And there's a lot of information, of course, that's in the script sometimes about what the set is, right? Like that's the first thing usually is described. It's like, oh, this is set in so-and-so, the time, the period, the style, or, sometimes that's very much, to the point. It's described like Fantasticks, which is a classic. Or it's not as much, and it leaves some room for interpretation. Regardless, there's interpretation happening because it's being directed by someone in a place, that is not going to repeat itself again. So it's like the first time that this person is directing it in that space with this team and with this cast. So it's always an interpretation, even if it's been done hundreds of times, like Fantasticks. And so for me, it's always I gather that information, and before I make any sort of decisions, of course, I have a lot of thoughts that come up in my mind. I talk to the director, and I always try to that's more of a listening session for me because I'm really curious to see how this director is envisioning this play. And different directors have different levels of how they imagine sets and how they visualize the space and how they share that information. Sometimes they're like, yeah, I kind of want this version of the play to really highlight this thing about it. Or sometimes they're like very descriptive. They're like, I want the set to be like this, or I want it to feel like this, or So I kind of gather all of this information, and I also always look at, there's a surface level of the script, and then I always kind of look at, like, what is the feeling and emotions that are really coming through. And sometimes there's a lot of things that are not said about the set in the stage directions, but they are said by the characters, or how they're moving through the space says a lot to me, when I'm reading. So I'm not reading it just for the sake of understanding the physics of the space, but, like, the feelings of the space. Like, what are the emotions? How does it move? How dynamic is it? How static is it? Or kind of like just finding those very abstract ideas first to then go back into more solid sort of rigid ideas. And a lot of it is looking at a lot of imagery, because I think we have a visual language. And so when I talk to the director, we say a lot of words, right? But then I'm like, yeah, we should really look at some images. So I do mood boards. I do, some ideas of just feel and look and feel of the space and like style of the space, and just kind of like what is that one thing that we really want the audience to get from this play. Really helps me also scenically be like, this is the thing that grounds this set, and this is what the audience is gonna see the first time they come into the space. The set is the first thing you see, so like how do you come into the space and get that impression about what is the impression about the play that you want to convey?
Yeah, and there are a lot of sets you come in. I remember Bed Trick was one, which I want to talk about, that when you see it the first time, there's a wow moment there. It's bright, it's colorful. And that one, with Keiko Green's kind of original production, most of the creation of that play was collaborative, right? And
it's a new play, yeah.
Did it come, did the set and scenic design come about that same way, with just as a collaborative team effort?
Somewhat, yeah. With these kinds of, I do a lot of new works as well, and that's always a very fun process, because it's the first time that I get to sort of build this world in a visual way, versus like something that has been done many times in productions. And it depends on the process. Like with this one, we definitely had a script already, so it was already sort of workshop with actors before I was brought on. So I kind of had something pretty solid to work off of. But definitely, Keiko was very involved in the process, and I was very curious about her response also to this. Of course, Michaela had thoughts about sort of how she sees this play. And when I read it the first time, I was like, oh, this is a very cinematic play. Like, how do we do this in the space that we're performing it in a way that it doesn't feel like the set is hindering in any way? Which is always the first thing I think about, is like, I think about transitions a lot, because like that is the thing that I notice a lot when I go see a play. I'm like, oh, now I can't pay attention to the next scene again if it's taking too long. So with this one, again, depends. Like when I've worked with Amy Poussin, who also does a lot of new works at Seattle Public Theater, and Matcha previously, a lot of it is also just like being flexible with the process as a designer, because things are still shifting. There might be scenes that shift. So how do I keep the set solid in a way that I can also still be able to be flexible and adjust as needed? Again, typically the world is usually set by the time that I'm brought in, but it's mostly a lot of like maybe dialogue and actions between actors that are changing, and usually less about changing a whole thing or a whole idea by the time that it's being produced. But it's always fun to have the playwright in the room, I think.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed about your designs, and English is one, and A Case for the Existence of God at Act was another one, that you have a knack for bringing motion to something that's static. I remember thinking, my wife and I were sitting there at Case for Existence of God, and looking at the ceiling that is pulled back. I mean, and you think about it, it's that you wouldn't have to put a ceiling in there.
Right.
But you did, and you have it at such an angle that it's pulled back, as if we're looking inside a box at this relationship between these two people. And also with English, with the way that the chairs are stacked up and, I don't know, welded together. I don't however that, but it provides motion. So that's one of the things I think you have a knack for doing. How do you attack something like that? I mean, is that something you go after when you design?
I think so. And like when someone says, like when I hear that from you, I'm like, maybe it is some part of it is unconsciously coming from being a performer, because I think of like myself in a space sometimes, maybe when I'm designing. But also I think like part of what we do when we do, our job as scenic designers is not necessarily to just bring a room onto a stage, right? We'd go see a theater because we want to have that sort of suspension of disbelief and feel something about this. And of course, dialogues and acting is a huge part of that. But like, if somebody just goes into a space and just sees a simple cubicle, especially in that space where it has such a tall ceiling, right? You kind of have to really contain the space somehow, that you feel like you're looking into this cubicle. Otherwise, it feels like expansive, and it doesn't give you that sense of this container that these two actors are
If there's
sort of trapped in this whole
constraints,
time. And at the same time, like, so much of it is informed by the space that this play is done in. Like, this is a 3/4 trust we're talking, and like the way that everybody from different states is going to experience this is important, and we want to have create the same experience for the audience no matter where they're watching something from. So I think about a lot of those things, and I think like some part of it is for that specifically for a case for the existence of God was how do we go from this container then to that expanse, and thankfully the show is closed, so I can spoil it a little. There's a big shift in the space that we go from this sort of container with the ceiling into a wider. So all of those things, I think, many elements of like physical things about the space, but also the emotional aspects that I was talking about. With English, the concept of chairs was something that's not in the script, and we sort of like added that to it. Like it's the script that Sanaz wrote so beautifully, it describes the space very realistically. It's set in a classroom in Iran, 2008. Like, it's very clear of, like, where is it, when is it, all of that. And for me, I always like to push it a little bit because I feel like, yes, I could just put a classroom on stage, but are we really getting the idea across of, like, how these people are struggling through language and what the world they're living in? And Nagma also thinks very much like me. We think alike, if you haven't noticed already, we have a theater company. So when we work together as director and designer also, we like to really kind of make it bury it down to the basics first, and then really understand like what is necessary to tell the story, and what it helps to convey. So like the chairs, of course, so much of it is about how they move into these different scenes, but also like kind of the chaos of Iran. Iran is chaotic, and it has some beauty, and it has all of these things that are lots of paradoxes, so kind of like the floating chairs kind of has that surreal aspect a little bit of like this classroom is in the chaos that they live in, and they're all trying to sort of get out of it somehow in their own way. So yeah, I think sort of layers of meaning help to, I guess, make me think of it that way, or kind of how I can make it more dynamic.
Yeah. Well, it's a nice set. It's the whole set is stark. I mean, there's a lot of starkness to that. Do you have a favorite design that you've done?
Oh my, it's always a hard question. It's like when ask like a painter if they have a favorite painting. There's so many. I've been so lucky recently to do so many different things, but I think the ones that always is forefront of my brain and stands out is Sense and Sensibility at Village last year. And partially it's because I think I had such a lovely process working with that design team and director. And we were all so like clear on what we wanted. We had fun. We all collaborated really well. It was a set that I was so proud of the way it turned out. I had so much fun with all the colors on the set, and it was a lot of watercolor, and like it had a really good fun process. I think that's the thing that probably stands out as the fun part, and also like opened a lot of doors for me as well after that, as for sure. And I think even though the set is not necessarily as crazy, but like I think because it was the show that we first produced with Seda, Forgotten History of Mastane, had a very simple set. I don't know if you had a chance to see that.
I did not, no.
It was the whole set was a blackboard that people would write on with like chalk, and it was super simple, but I thought it was like in its own minimalism, like I had a lot of fun with it, and I thought it worked really well for our show, and like people really responded to it, and we were able to create a nice container for the show we're doing. So those two always stand out. It's just hard. There's a lot of elements from each project.
Well, you talk about Village, and Village is one of those unique situations that they have two theaters. Right?
Yes.
So they run in Issaquah first, and then move to Everett. I have not been negligent in my duties and have not been to the Everett Theater.
Yes, very different theater than Issaquah.
Well, so as a designer, how do you manage that? Do you have to come back in and make some tweaks in the couple of weeks in there between?
No, so with Village, I kind of think ahead a little bit. So usually we are not involved in the process from Issaquah to Everett. The stages are somewhat similar, but the house is different, quite different, and the sight lines are very different. So that's the thing I have to really think about is like, okay, yes, this set can transfer, and the Brad Bixler, who's the TD, is very great about sort of checking that as well. But I always have to think about like the Everett seating is much wider. There's no balcony, but it's very steep and it's much wider. So you have a lot more steeper sort of sight lines. I really have to think about, which with one of the shows I'm doing there right now is very much clear that we really need to consider this as sight lines. So depends on the productions and the spaces that they're being moved to. These two spaces tend to have a lot of similarities, but also really have to think ahead. But I'm not usually, I kind of do all of that ahead of time.
Okay.
So when it transfers, I'm not really involved.
Okay. And you design it so that when it does transfer, there's not no adjustments.
Exactly. You have to consider it. Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
So what's next for you? You implied you're doing something in the village. Is that something you can talk about?
Yes. Yeah. So season is announced, so I can talk about it. I'm designing Camelot, the first show next season at Village. I'm also involved with Oregon Shakespeare Festival this summer, not as a designer, but as a cultural consultant. There's a solo show happening by an incredible Iranian-American actor called Barzin Akhavan, who used to be in Seattle. Wonderful actor. He's been all over, Broadway. He's made it all to all the good places, and he's bringing his solo show to OSF this year, and he asked me to be involved as a cultural consultant. So that's been really fun to.
Do you know what that is?
It's open. It's called Befarmaing, or
Okay.
As You Please. It opens in August.
Okay.
I believe I'm gonna mess up the date, but it's in August for sure. And so yeah, that's been very
Okay.
exciting to kind of
Yeah.
do a different thing a little bit.
There's a great partnership between Seattle and Oregon Shakespeare.
Yes.
I'm going to be heading down there the week of the 21st to take
Mhm.
in kind of the indoor part of the season.
Oh, great.
So it looks like I'll have to wait. I'll have to push my
Yes.
outdoor trip to August.
Yes, I will pass on the info to you. But yes,
It'll
it's a great
keep me
one.
out of the heat too. In the
Yeah.
middle of summer there is
Yeah.
sometimes not fun.
Yeah, and we have a lot of stuff coming up. We just announced our next show with collaboration between Seda and SPT, Seattle Public Theater, for 2025. It's another play written by Nagma Samini, who directed English, and she's also directing this called Where Is Here, or Inja Kujast, and we're going to be performing it in English and Farsi. So we're going to do, it's a solo show, and we're going to have two different actors who are going to be acting English and Farsi different
great.
nights. So that's going to be very, I think, different kind of we're trying to do a lot of bilingual work, I think. Sometimes we just do it in Farsi, sometimes in English, sometimes both. Experimenting with language, and how people respond to it. So.
Have you ever thought of, and I don't know how this would work in a play situation. I know that sometimes Fifth Avenue and other larger theaters will do shows for the hearing impaired, and where they'll have subtitles.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Have you thought about? Because I think it would be
Yes.
interesting to see a show in Farsi and hear the line. Because I enjoy doing that.
That's what we did for Mastane.
Oh,
Forgotten
okay.
to Serve Mastane. It was in Farsi, and we had English super titles.
Okay.
So we tried that. That was a very interesting process, and people really connected with it, and we had a lot of non-Iranians also seeing that show, which was exciting for me to hear sort of how they are, because of course we go to operas, and that sort of same idea is there, and we had a really large sort of right above the set, and of course people are still doing this, but yeah, it works, and it's like people I think are very excited to hear a play in its native language as well.
I mean, I enjoy that on television, watching some foreign shows with sub. I'd rather watch them with the real language and subtitles than an English overdub, because the emotion's not there.
Yeah.
And this actually is something that English sort of speaks to,
Exactly.
is that the emotion that you can convey in your native tongue because you're comfortable with it, and is so much more than if you've got to translate it, and there's you lose a layer. So
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which with Where Is Here, which we're doing in 2025, we're going to be doing it without the subtitles for the Farsi, but we're going to encourage people to see both, because I think there's also something about, of course you can go see the English version and understand the story, but then if you after then go see the Farsi and see how does that changes your experience of watching a play. Of course, knowing the backstory, but not having to be distracted by supertitles. It's a whole interesting experience. And like you said, we watch foreign films, and I also do the same thing. I feel like there's always, even in translation, of course, there's things that are lost in subtitles, but at least you're hearing the emotion through someone's voice.
Right. Parmida Ziaei, thank you so much for taking the time
Thank you.
to join me here today. For folks to keep up with you, you have a website,
Yes.
parmidaziaei.com.
Yes.
And social media as well?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
I'm on Instagram. Same first and last name.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect. And then for Seda to keep up with Seda, Seda Theatre, TRE.com as well.
Yes. Yeah, and Seda also has social media and Instagram, and we're very vocal about everything that's coming up. So.
Excellent, excellent.
Yes.
Well, I look forward to all the stuff you're doing
Thank
at Village, at Public Theater with Seda next season. I've enjoyed every single thing you've done this
Thank
year. I'm just amazed at the variety of sets that you've built. They're all beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So, once again, Greg Heilman here behind the curtain. My guest today has been Parmida Ziaei. And until next time, I will see you at the stage door.